Hey guys, welcome back to Carib 21 Network. So today on Carib 21 Network, we are celebrating the life and the contribution of one of the greatest prime ministers of all time, and that is the Honorable Maurice Bishop. So today, October 19th, in 1983, Maurice Bishop was assassinated in Grenada. And today we're going to be talking about Maurice Bishop and his contribution to the wider Caribbean. And this is a discussion that we have been having all week in light of the news coming out of Grenada that the American government is trying to install a radar system in Grenada to help with its fight against Venezuela. The same airport that in 1983 the American government accused the Maurice Bishop government of setting up a Soviet military base, that is the airport in 2025 that the Americans are trying to use to pretty much set up a military base in their fight against Venezuela. And today I would also like to add to the conversation a part of history that is conveniently left out of the invasion of Grenada in 1983, and that part is about 6 Caribbean islands that joined the United States of America in the invasion of Grenada. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this week we have been talking about what is going on in the Caribbean, the Caribbean zone of peace being disrupted. And one thing I said is that I hope that history does not repeat itself, and this is a part of history that we would not want to repeat itself, where the American government gets different Caribbean islands ganging up and fighting against each other and disrupting unity in the Caribbean. So that is why I want to bring light to this conversation, because whenever we talk about the invasion of Grenada in 1983, we only talk about the American invading Grenada and not how that the Americans drag 6 Caribbean islands in this invasion of Grenada.
Early this morning, forces from 6 Caribbean democracies and the United States began a landing or landings on the island of Grenada in the Eastern Caribbean. We have taken this decisive action for 3 reasons. First, and overriding importance, to protect innocent lives, including up to 1,000 Americans whose personal safety is, of course, my paramount concern. Second, to forestall further chaos. And third, to assist in the restoration of conditions of law and order and of governmental institutions to the island of Grenada.
So the 6 Caribbean islands that were involved in the invasion of Grenada are St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua Barbuda, Jamaica, and Barbados. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and Dominica, they provided police forces into Grenada to help with the invasion. And Antigua Barbuda, Jamaica, and Barbados, they provided soldiers. And if you're watching this video and you're wondering why would Caribbean islands, a part of CARICOM at that time, why would they get involved in this? Why would they join up with the American government to carry out the invasion of Grenada? And by the end of this video, you are going to know why the Caribbean governments were tricked into going into this invasion, joining forces with the President Reagan administration to go into Grenada to invade Grenada.
Final hours of the battle for Grenada, the Americans were still pouring in more combat troops who arrived at the new airport, one wave following another. The build-up coincided with the arrival of helicopter gunships, all urgently needed reinforcements to end the fighting as quickly as possible. In the words of one American officer, they were using whatever it takes to free the island. But even as these men came ashore, the invasion forces were still facing intense fire from the last remaining Cuban strongholds in the hills surrounding the airport. For the first time, the Americans, who allowed only their own news teams in, showed how their heavy artillery was trying to pound the opposition forces into an early submission. Smoke-blackened skies mark the locations where the strongest resistance had been coming from. In addition, the Americans have been making repeated airstrikes to weaken the Cubans and to allow ground forces to take up better positions. With the battle for the capital, St. George's, over, the Americans turned their full attention to the south. The first accompanied excursions into the island by independent witnesses uncovered what President Reagan feels has clearly justified military intervention in such a formidable way. A short ride with the Marines through rough terrain, and there was a group of Cubans being held prisoner by armed police units from Barbados. Earlier, at least 200 other Cubans were flown out to Barbados for repatriation. It's now believed that the Americans have captured at least 600 Cubans, with as possibly as many as 1,000 others to come after the fighting. The numbers far exceed what President Reagan's intelligence advisors were saying before the invasion.
So as you can see in this video, that the Barbados police force was used to capture and to hold prisoners, and these prisoners were shipped to Barbados before the ones from Cuba. They went back, they sent them back to Cuba. And this recording is taken from the Associated Press. And the Associated Press is pretty much like an American, a government media that operates in America, and that's been around for a long time. So this footage was taken from the Associated Press.
But perhaps the biggest prize of all came when the Marines found what the president says is yet more clear evidence of Cuba's occupation plans for Grenada. Russian and Cuban ammunition was found, as well as communications equipment. It was all there in such quantities that the Americans believed this to be the makings of a full-scale military base. These are the weapons which Mr. Reagan says turned a friendly island paradise into a Soviet-Cuban colony, being readied to export terror and undermine democracy. American civilians still on Grenada have been talking for the first time. Many of them witnessed the fighting. Their safety was of paramount importance to the president, who was mindful of the possibility of a hostage situation like in Iran.
We saw planes coming in, going out. We saw the battleships.
It's a Radio Free Grenada that was, we think, bombed on, exploded 3 or 4 times. We were told afterwards it was an ammunition site that they had blown up. The Holiday Inn was burned down while we were watching last night. A good part of it, I don't know how much of it.
Grenadians, too, have been venturing out into new surroundings. Their Marxist Revolutionary Council on the island has been destroyed.
So those footage were from the Associated Press, as I said. And just keep in mind that the Associated Press, it's like a media organization that's controlled by the American government. And you're going to learn later that the Associated Press was the only one that was able to cover this. They did not allow independent media, international media to cover this. So the government media, they covered this by themselves. And the reason why this is important to this conversation is note, why did the other Caribbean islands agree to be a part of this invasion? So this invasion took place 1 week after the assassination of Maurice Bishop. And you are going to learn further on in this video from some CIA whistleblowers about the lengths that the American government went through at the time in terms of putting out false information out there. So for example, they would use like local newspaper like in Jamaica, like the Jamaica Gleaner, to put out information and to give wrong information of what was going on in Grenada. And that way was why the Caribbean, you see the other Caribbean islands, they were there ready to help. Because in their mind, they were helping their sister island of Grenada from becoming a Soviet military base, which was a lot of misinformation. And you're going to find out with, as I said, whistleblowers from the CIA that came out and revealed everything after that this was just an attempt to destabilize the country because of Maurice Bishop and his relationship with Cuba and the whole idea of socialism in the Caribbean. And the American government did not want any socialist government in the Caribbean, especially one having a relationship with Fidel Castro.
The destabilization, we were already tracking that. And you recall our show here on Alternative Views last March, in which we predicted that Grenada would be invaded. And as a matter of fact, I was in Grenada in September talking to Maurice Bishop at some length, and I warned him that he would be invaded. The indicators were all there, and then we've got lots of details coming out now. Details like one of the medical students was a CIA case officer, complete with radio and frequencies to talk to the people out on the ships. Details like conversations that this infamous Major Austin had with U.S. officials before he and Bernard Cord moved to kill Bishop and create the crisis which Reagan used as an excuse to move in. I think there was a continuity of CIA effort against Grenada. That's documented. There was a plan and rehearsal for an invasion. They had an invasion ready. The Amberine Islands exercises 18 months before, as in the Grenadine Islands. I mean, it was exactly what was eventually done.
To rescue
Americans, yes,
yeah.
Exactly. President Reagan's two statements on public television that Grenada was a threat to our national security. Well, now, come on, you know, this tiny little place out of all the 4 billion people in the world, why it would be named unless they were preparing the people of the United States for an invasion. President Reagan lied extensively on television about it. So did Schultz and the others. They invaded. I mean, the coincidence is absolutely overpowering. That was the week that the bodies were coming home from Beirut, the 241 Marines. That was the time of the crisis. That was when the United States was focusing on the bankruptcy of his policies, President Reagan's policies, in the Middle East, and we had these young Marines as evidence, and they were being brought back, and all of the television cameras in the world were going to be interviewing people about the horror of U.S. lives being lost in the Middle East. And suddenly, wham, a big dramatic invasion of Grenada, and people are talking about that a lot more than they are about the Marines. Instead of people being horrified, young Americans are flocking down to join the Marines because it looked like so much fun what was done in Grenada. The Reagan administration said that there were Cuban brigades. There were not. There were engineers who were working on that airport for a project which Margaret Thatcher had helped finance. None of their rationales and explanations were true and honest. So you look for the reason why they were not overthrowing a Marxist dictatorship, because Bishop had been killed. Austin was in power, and he was a military man, the kind that they're so comfortable with normally. So the reason was to serve the timing of their own political problems and interests back here in this country. And it was a brilliant operation for that. It was so neat because Grenada is so small that they could smother it militarily. Even then, you notice that they got in trouble because the Cuban engineers pulled out their AKs and fought back. And so you recall that the White House and the Pentagon were saying that there was half a Cuban brigade there. They were fighting so hard, and it turned out in the end there were exactly the number of Cubans that Fidel had said there were. There were 700.
And they were all engineers.
And they were all engineers except for a few security guards. And just exactly as the Cubans had said.
There wasn't that general and the colonel and all that.
And the brigade and all of that. Nor did the Cubans attack the U.S. forces, by the way. And this is a very significant point. We landed, our helicopters and the parachutists landed. The Cubans could have killed hundreds of them in the air and shot down helicopters as they were coming in and parachutists as they're coming down. They didn't. They didn't fire a shot until the U.S. troops were on the ground, regrouped, and assaulted the Cubans. And then the Cubans fired back.
So that was John Stockwell. John Stockwell, a former CIA whistleblower. He was the one that you saw in that interview talking about the American effort to destabilize the government in Grenada. And what is interesting about this also is the same John Stockwell that was involved in Angola, the plan of the American government to destabilize Angola. And he also was involved in Jamaica. I did a video recently with the same John Stockwell talking about the CIA efforts in Jamaica between 1975 and 1980 to destabilize the country and to get Michael Manley out of power. And the connection here is Michael Manley, Maurice Bishop, Fidel Castro. And they saw the relationship between Michael Manley, Maurice Bishop, and Fidel Castro as a threat. And so Maurice Bishop was not assassinated because he was trying to be a dictator government. Maurice Bishop was just trying to bring forward his island and to make it prosperous. And one of the first steps that they were doing when this invasion took place is building out that airport, because at the time Grenada was very popular with tourism, but because there was no international airport, people would have to go to the other islands and take a smaller airline to get there. So building out a large airport would boost the economy in terms of tourism. And that airport was one of the information that I got also is that the airport was funded by Margaret Thatcher at the time and the Prime Minister of England, and the Cubans that were there were Cuban engineers, and they were building the airport. So based on some of the information that John Stockwell, whistleblower, came out and said is that, look, it was very normal at the time for the American government. They have a program called Operation Mockingbird, where it's a government intelligence organization that they control the media. And he was saying that it was very common at the time. They did it in Jamaica, they did it in Angola, and he also believed that they did it in Grenada. And is the Operation Mockingbird is going out there and spreading misinformation in the local newspaper. So when you see the 6 Caribbean islands taking part in that invasion, the government at the day, they believed that they were going in and helping the sovereignty of Grenada, because they were of the belief that Cuba was really trying to take over the country and to turn Grenada into like a Soviet military base. That is what they really believed at the time, because of the information that was fed to them by the American government. And now we see in 2025, the same airport, the Maurice Bishop International Airport, that now they're trying to install a radar system at that same airport that they accuse of being a military base back in 1983. And now they're literally trying to turn it into a military base to help with their fight with Venezuela. And the thing is, Maurice Bishop, when you look at what Maurice Bishop and Michael Manley was able to accomplish in the short time that they had before Jamaica was destabilized back in 1975 and before Grenada was destabilized, they accomplished a lot in terms of free education. And I know at the time Grenada had one of the biggest medical program in the Caribbean, and that was one of the excuses why the American government used that, because they said upwards of 1,000 American students were in Grenada at the time, and they used that to say that they are going to invade Grenada because they want to protect the American students that was there. But all Maurice Bishop wanted to do was to develop his country.
The fact of the matter is, they tell us if you're speaking Dutch, you're the best. If it's English, you're the best. French is the best. Spanish is the best. American is the best. And all of us hating each other. When in fact we are one people from one Caribbean with one struggle and one destiny. We see it therefore as one of our historic duties and responsibilities to pull down these artificial barriers of colonialism and to develop that oneness and that unity that we nearly lost. We believe it is critically necessary to have close relations with all of our neighbors.
It is becoming more and more difficult for developing third world countries to go forward, because unfortunately our economies remain by and large dependent on and tied to the capitalist world economies. And therefore, when the capitalist world goes through their cyclical crises, one after the other, it has an immediate effect on us. As we say at home, when the capitalist world catches a cold, we catch pneumonia. And the crisis in the capitalist world has been deep. In all of the developed industrialized countries, there is greater and greater unemployment. And as this unemployment goes deeper and deeper into the society, the people who feel it the most are the poor and working people. The massive cutbacks. The massive cuts in social welfare. The cuts are not coming in the arms race. The cuts are not coming out of the arms budget.
So a lot of people normally ask me, why do I have these three people on my wall? And I always explain that these three people are three of my heroes, and Maurice Bishop, Mia Motley, and Marcus Garvey. And one thing that the three of them have in common is that they believe that we are one Caribbean. That is something that they strongly believed in. Mia Motley, presently, she's the one out there like fighting to keep this Caribbean together. Maurice Bishop was all about the Caribbean, and Marcus Garvey the same. And one of the things that Marcus Garvey said is in his writing is that a people without knowledge of their history is like a tree without a root. You are going to wither and fade away if you don't know your history. And one of the main reasons why I'm doing this is because with this conversation heating up this week, I still see a few what I would call delusional people saying in comment sections that, look, it is okay for America to come and to use whatever islands they want as military base or to do whatever they want. And people are saying that, look, allow the Americans to come in because you need the Americans more than they need you. And that is just nonsense, because another thing that Marcus Garvey said was emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves will free our mind. And the fact that in 2025, people are still thinking that way. Just imagine your child go to school and someone that is a bully beat up your child and take away their money, and your child come home and you're saying like, no, like he's a bully, but you need him more than he needs you, and don't worry about it, and he's just doing it for your good. That is what people that are saying that allow America to do this, that is how they sound, like ridiculous. So this is just to remind us that at the end of the day, we are one Caribbean. And if the Trump administration does anything to destabilize one island in the Caribbean, if he did it to them, he can do it to you. So I believe that that is the mindset that we need to have. And we also need to have, we're living in an age of information. And as I said at the beginning of this video, the 6 Caribbean islands that were a part of this invasion of Grenada, they were fed with misinformation, saying that Grenada is about to become a Soviet military base, and they felt the need that they had to go in and to help their brothers and sisters in Grenada, and that was all based on lies. So us in the Caribbean, we need to cultivate our own stories, our history. We need to start telling our own stories, because if it happened then, it can happen again. And we have seen traces of it. We see what is going on in Haiti, and with the American government asking Jamaica, Barbados, and Kenya to go in there. And we saw some of the pushback from people in Haiti talking about, why would someone from Jamaica, why would you send military from Jamaica or from Barbados? And a lot of the governments decided that they're not going to do it. So this, if that could happen in 1983, it could happen again. And it's not a far-fetched idea that the American government could go into Venezuela and to take out the government and then ask us in the Caribbean to go to Venezuela to help with peacekeeping effort. We have seen it in the past, and it's not a far-fetched idea that that could happen again. So as I said, the purpose of this is for us to know that we are one Caribbean, and if one Caribbean island suffer, the next one can also suffer.
You ever notice how the U.S. only calls it a dictatorship when it's a black country that's decided that they don't need saving? Because in 1979, this 35-year-old man led a revolution on his little island called Grenada. And when he tried to build something real, schools, healthcare, literacy, America called him a communist and made sure that he never got to finish what he started. Meet Maurice Bishop. He wasn't chasing power, he was chasing dignity. Bishop and his people threw out a corrupt leader named Eric Gary. He built free schools, made healthcare accessible. and launched adult literacy programs that nearly wiped out illiteracy on the island. He'd tell people that they must be the engineers of their own futures. That line hit different because he actually meant it. Grenada started looking like proof that a small black nation could thrive without begging the U.S. or Britain for approval. Then Bishop linked up with Cuba for doctors, teachers, engineers, not missiles. But Washington saw that as a threat. Reagan's team went on TV calling that little island a Soviet base because they were building airports to bring in tourism. Imagine that. An airport becomes a reason to invade? The real fear wasn't communism. It was a black country standing on its own 2 feet. But by '83, people inside Bishop's own party started turning on him. His deputy, Bernard Cord, accused him of being too popular and had him locked up. But the people weren't playing that. Thousands of Grenadians marched. They freed him and they carried him through the streets. And within hours, soldiers loyal to Cord opened fire. Bishop and several ministers were taken to Fort Rupert and executed against a wall. And 6 days later, the U.S. invaded under something called Operation Urgent Fury. They said it was to restore democracy. You don't bomb a tiny island filled of 100,000 people to restore anything. You bomb it to remind them who's in charge. After his death, people cried in the streets. He wasn't a dictator, he was hope. And the U.S. couldn't let that stand. So they buried him under headlines calling him a Marxist puppet. Meanwhile, the airport that he built, it still stands. They renamed it Maurice Bishop International Airport. Every plane that lands there touches the ground that he dreamed up. Maurice Bishop didn't die because he failed. He died because he made freedom look possible. Because every time a black nation tries to build something of its own, the empire shows up with bombs and a press release. They call it democracy, but really? It's fear. Fear of what happens when we stop asking for permission. Say his name. Maurice Bishop.